Welcome to Life in Full Expression. So happy you are here. My name is Beth Wolf, your host. And today I'm going to be reading The Law and the Promise, first chapter by Neville Goddard. It's called The Law, Imagining Creates Reality. And one of my deep desires in sharing this is giving you a bit of a glimpse in what I have discovered and developed and really delivered my own alchemy and artistry and adventure from this incredible text, not only the Law and the Promise, but how Neville Goddard introduced me to a whole different perspective on the Bible that I had studied for over 30 years. And I was first, maybe you could relate to this, I was first introduced to the God of the Bible as something that is outside of me, that there's something wrong with me, that I needed this God in order to go to heaven, that Jesus was to be invited into me. And then I began almost a 3-decade study, very deep study into the Bible. And as I came from the perspective that was conditioned to me initially, that it's the inherent word of God, it's infallible, it's this historical book, the more and more questions I had. So if this resonates with you, stay with me. This is going to be an incredible discovery as I really kind of take you through my early childhood to where I'm at now, and continue to develop and discover more of my own wonderful artistry. And Neville Goddard took the Bible to a whole different level of expansion with me and for me. And so my desire is to share this incredible love that I feel now. And so here we go. The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. He was very much influenced by one of the men, William Blake, that you can see in 1757 and 1827. He was alive and he was an amazing poet, artist. I looked at some of his artwork and it was extraordinary. So hang in there. Let's go. Let's dive into Neville Goddard in The Law and the Promise. And here we go with, and I'm just going to slowly advance slides as I come into the reading. One of the first things that Neville says is nothing appears or continues in being by a power of its own. Events happen because comparatively stable, imaginal activities created them. And they continue in being only as long as they receive such support. Now, the first time I read this, I'm like, Neville, what are you talking about? And so as we dive into this book and this first chapter on the law, imagining creates reality, let's look at first, he talks about that the purpose of the first portion of this book is to show through actual true stories how imagining creates reality. Science progresses by way of hypothesis, tentatively tested and afterwards accepted or rejected according to the facts of experience. The claim that imagining creates reality needs no more consideration than is allowed by science. It proves itself in performance. The world in which we live is the world of imagination. In fact, life itself is an activity of imagining. For Blake, wrote Professor Morrison of the University of St. Andrews, quote, "The world originates in a divine activity, identical with what we know ourselves as the activity of imagination. His task being to open the immortal eyes of man inward into the worlds of thought, into eternity, ever expanding in the bosom of God, the human imagination." And there it is right there that began to discover the first time I read a statement like that, that the bosom of God is my own wonderful imagination. I was like, wow. So Neville goes on to say that nothing appears or continues in being by a power of its own. Events happen because comparatively stable imaginal activities created them, and they continue in being only as long as they receive such support. The secret of imaging, writes Douglas Fawcett, is the greatest of all problems to the solution of which the mystic aspires. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme delight in the far-off solution of this mystery. So if we look at when man solves the mystery of imaging, he will have discovered the secret of causation. That is, imagining creates reality. So let's just kind of interject ourselves into that statement. When you and I solve the mystery of imaging, we will have discovered the secret of causation. And that is, imaging creates reality. Therefore, the man or woman who is aware of what he or she is imaging knows what he or she is creating, realizes more and more that the drama of life is imaginal, not physical. All activity is at bottom imaginal. An awakened imagination works with a purpose. It creates and conserves the desirable and transforms or destroys the undesirable. So as I pause here just for a little bit about my own story, and I was introduced to this God and this Jesus when I was in elementary school, and being conditioned and told that I need some kind of entity outside of me to make me okay and to save me from some kind of hell. As I moved into junior high and high school, began to believe this more. And you know, your typical journey in adolescence and teenage, you experiment against what maybe the norm is. And so, now you really need this God outside of you to make sure you're okay. And it was really conforming to certain values and standards of certain churches here and there. And as I got into my 20s in college and 30s and 40s and kept studying, one of the things that I became very curious about, and perhaps you resonate with this a little bit, is I started asking the question, why is all these different versions of the Bible? Why is there not just one? And which one is the best one? Or which one is the most truth? And I actually began to dive into where did all the different versions of the Bibles come from? And then this created more questions, and I found that in most cases, not all of them, and I this is my level of knowledge so far. You know, if you guys know more, put it in the comments. I would love to learn from you guys of what you know of different versions of the Bible, and what just the disagreements between Protestants and Catholics. I was like, well, why does the Catholic Bible have more books in it than the Protestant Bible? And so I began to study all this and ask these questions, and finding some reasons why is it really had to do with there were certain people in the world that wanted to translate the Bible or the words that would benefit them in some way. Not always, but some way. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So how do we know that it's really this infallible word? And I was just like, I'm very curious about this. I'm questioning this. And to share my story, at times in churches that I was in, these questions that I was asking were really very not popular. And then also experiencing that in some churches I was in, most of them, that it was always the man that had to be the head of the house, and that, they had the final say. And I was like, I just thought there's something in me that just knows that that's not okay. That I even used the word wrong. How is it that women can run, Fortune 500 companies and prime ministers of nations, as well as all kinds of incredible endeavors on the world, yet in this particular sect of thinking, the man is the head or the final say. So I really began to search and search, and this is where Neville is coming into the story of things. But before I found Neville, I thought, well, I'll just go study the Hebrew Bible. And so what I did is I studied Hebrew for a year. I learned how to write some basic sentences. I learned the alphabet. And there was one key element that really served me. And again, if there's some Hebrew scholars listening and know more about Hebrew, go ahead and add to these. I love learning. I found that our English language is pretty much a noun language. And in my discovery process, found that Hebrew, very symbolic, very deep, mystical language, absolutely gorgeous. And it's a verb language, an action language. And I was like, you mean Yeshua, which is Jesus in Hebrew, from the best pronunciation I can come from, is actually the act of saving. And so I began to experiment that if I'm bringing in an entity that is Yeshua, Jesus, that there is something in me saving on a continuous basis. And so that began to open me up out of my previous conditioned thinking. And so the next level was Hebrew. And then the next discovery has been Neville. And this is where I am in my growth right now and development, is learning another viewpoint that possibly the Bible is our own wonderful states of consciousness and states of being that we can experiment with and be. So going back to reading more, that the law and the promise is introducing to us a lot of these different states of beingness in the Bible. And so Neville begins to introduce to me about imaging and imagination, and that my own wonderful imagination is really the secret of the power that is breathing me and that's within me. So going on, divine imaging and human imaging are not two powers at all. Rather, they are actually they're actually one. So the valid distinction exists between the seeming two lies not in the substance with which they operate, but in the degree of the intensity of the operant power itself. That's us. Acting at high tension, an imaginal act is an immediate objective fact. Keyed low, some low tension, an imaginal act is realized in a time process. But whether imagination is keyed high or low, it is the ultimate, essentially non-objective reality from which objectives are poured forth like sudden fancies. No objective is independent of imaging on some level or levels. Everything in the world owes its character to imagination on one of its various levels. Again, everything in our world owes its character to imagination on one of its various levels. Objectivity reality, writes Fitch, is solely produced through imagination. Objects seem so independent of our perception of them that we incline to forget that they owe their origin to imagination. The world in which we live is a world of imagination. And mankind, through his imaginal activities, creates the realities and the circumstances of life. This he does either knowingly or unknowingly. Now, are we creating a life that we would love by design, or are we creating it by default? Is another way to look at that. We create our realities, our circumstances, and conditions of our lives, and we do it knowingly or unknowingly. And as I read this, I went, oh my gosh, the circumstances and conditions are actually come from the cause. I'm the cause of them. I'm the one that's imagining them. And then they show up in my life. They manifest these circumstances, conditions, and situations. This began to transform my thinking that I wasn't helpless. And it stopped this quest in me that had gone on for 45 plus years of looking for something outside of myself to save me. Just so much freedom in that. Men pay too little attention, men and women pay too little attention to this priceless gift. The human imagination, and a gift is practically non-existent unless there is a conscious possession of it and a readiness to use it. All men, women possess the power to create reality, but this power sleeps as though dead when not consciously exercised. Men live in the very heart of creation, the human imagination, yet are no wiser for what takes place therein. The future will not be fundamentally different from the imaginal activities of man. Therefore, the individual who can summon at will whatever imaginal activity he or she pleases, and to whom the visions of his imagination are as real as the forms of nature, is the master of his or her fate. Again, that summons. The future is the imaginal activity of man in its creative march. Imagining is the creative power, not only of the poet, the artist, the actor, the orator, but of the scientist, the inventor, the merchant, and the artisan. Its abuse in unrestrained, unlovely image making is obvious, but its abuse in undue repression breeds a sterility which robs man of actual wealth of experience. Imaging novel solutions to ever more complex problems is far more noble than to run from problems. Life is a continual solution of a continuously synthetic problem. Imaging creates events. The world created out of men's imaging comprises unnumbered wearing beliefs. Therefore, there can never be a perfectly stable or static environment or state. Today's events are bound to disturb yesterday's established order. Imaginative men and women invariably unsettle a pre-existing peace of mind. I love to look at life in full expression. We're in this harmony. We're in these waves of music and notes. And if there was always a perfect stability or static state of consciousness and being, we might be kind of bored. I don't think Neville here is talking so much about the environmental stability of our solar system and universe, but that we ask questions. We challenge the conditioning that may be giving to us, in a respectful way, in a loving way. Or sometimes, we may not have the skill set to express it that way, but we still keep asking those questions. And so that's what I kept doing, is just keep asking questions. He goes on, do not bow before the dictate of facts and accept life on the basis of the world without. Assert the supremacy of your imaginal acts over facts, and put all things in subjection to them. Hold fast to your ideal in your imagination. Nothing can take it from you but your failure to persist in the imaging the ideal realized. Imagine only such states that are of value or promise well. And you can just, if you're not driving and able to look at the screen, there's a bit of a formula that Neville gives us right here, is that holding fast, in other words, staying consistent with an ideal in your imagination, a life of design that you would really love, starts first in your thoughts and your feelings. And he's saying that if we can hold that ideal, and a lot of times the practice of doing that is being still. Neville uses often, if not always, at the end of his lectures, let us go into the silence and be still. And even if we look at some of the actions that the Christ consciousness that Jesus did in the New Testament, that he would go away from the crowd and he would go into prayer with his Father. And that's another way of us shutting out the senses that have already manifested, that we see, hear, feel, touch, and we go into the Father, and the Father is our own wonderful imagination. And so the second part of this formula is know that nothing can take away your ideal in your imagination, but the failure to persist in the imaging of the ideal realized. And sometimes our current feedback that we're getting from the world tells us, I'm just going to give up. This is never going to work out. I don't see it, so I'm not going to believe it. And Neville is introducing to us through the law and the promise that continue to persist in imagining the ideal that you would love to realize. So even in the comments right now, if your ideal was realized in health, relationships, time and money freedom, and a career that gives you life, what would be that ideal? I would love to read those ideals and hold those with you. And then the third part of this formula, imagine only those states that are of value or promise well. Often, sometimes in research, they say that we've got 60 to 70,000 thoughts going on in our head daily. And sometimes it's not safe to walk down the own hallways of our own mind, because we might be kind of kicking our own ass. And so this is another part of a formula that we are imagining, really valuable ideals for ourselves, that a component of self-love. And if we've got love in us, then we've got that love to give. All right, well, going on from this formula with this part, let's see where we're at. So imagining novel solutions is really where we're at. All right, so imagining creates events. And the world created out of men's imaging comprises unnumbered wearing beliefs. Therefore, there can never be that perfectly stable and static state. So as we go on a little further, do not bow before those the dictate of facts and accept life on that basis. And this is where this formula comes in. So next up is an imaginal change. To attempt to change circumstances before you change your imaginal activity is to struggle against the very nature of things. Have you experienced where if the conditions and circumstances would change on the outside, I would feel so much better on the inside? And so this is what Neville is sharing with us, is that we're just going to be struggling, and we're going to be going against the very nature of things. There can be no outer change until there is first an imaginal change. Everything you do accompanied by an imaginal change is but futile readjustment of surfaces. We're just working on the surface, but that way. Imagining the wish fulfilled brings about a union with state. And during that union, you behave in keeping with your imaginal change. And one of the things, if you're new to Neville or not, he is just very known for feeling as if the wish is already fulfilled. If you are already feeling the health, vibrancy, and the relationship, and that time and money freedom, and the career that gives you life, what would be those feelings? This shows you that an imaginal change will result in a change of behavior. Start on the inside first, and then that behavior begins to change. However, your ordinary imaginal alterations as you pass from one state to another are not transformations, because each of them is so rapidly succeeded by another in this reverse direction. But whenever one state grows so stable as to become your constant mood, your habitual attitude, then the habitual state defines your character and is a true transformation. So that last statement, when this state of beingness, a state of consciousness, becomes our constant mood, our constant habitual attitude, and then that habitual state defines the character and is a true transformation. So that is releasing the old and writing a whole new story within ourselves. So how do you do this? How do you grow your new state of being? What does that look like? What do we explain this to us, Neville? Well, he says it starts with self-abandonment. That is the secret. You must abandon yourself mentally to your wish fulfilled in your love for that state. And in doing so, live in the new state and no more in the old state. You can't commit yourself to what you do not love. So the secret of self-commission is faith plus love. Faith is believing what is unbelievable. Commit yourself to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. In faith that this act of self-commission will become a reality. And it must become a reality because imaging creates reality. Imagination is both conservative and transformative. So how can you build your imagination? Here's a couple ways that he talks about. It is conservative when it builds its world from images supplied by memory and the evidence of the senses. It is creatively transformative when images imagines things as they ought to be, building its world out of the generous dreams of fancy. In the procession of images, the ones that take precedence naturally are those of the senses. Nevertheless, a present sense impression is only an image. It does not differ in nature from a memory image or the image of a wish. What makes a present sense impression so objectively real is the individual's, my imagination, your imagination, is functioning in it and thinking from it. Whereas in a memory image or a wish, the individual's imagination is not functioning in it and thinking from it, but it is functioning out of it and thinking of it. So there's a couple different forms of building imagination. Now, the transformative imagination is the one that is really going to allow us a whole new state of consciousness, a whole new state of being. So if you would enter into the image in your imagination, Neville was extraordinary with his visualization and imagination, and he could, use those superpowers, those mental faculties, all of us have them, that where he could enter into the imagination. And I think in modern terms today, that we could equate this to sports psychology, that you're visualizing your basketball shot, you're visualizing, your start of a sprint, you're visualizing going over the high jump, you're visualizing what it feels like as you putt a golf ball and it goes in the hole, or that you're, swinging the bat. You could just go on and on and on. Sports psychology is this visualization where you are entering in to the very feeling and sensations that the performance that you desire to design of the outcome, that you see yourself, going across the finish line first. So going back to the text, if you would enter into the image in your imagination, then would you know what it is to be creatively transformative? Then would you realize your wish? And then you would be happy. Every image can be embodied. And when Neville is talking about this embodiment, that's just as if an athlete or a person of business or in your health and relationships, that you are sensorizing in your body of what that would feel like as if it is already happening. So, a short story is, I completed a 25-year marriage, and during the divorce, my daughters, really took a step back in a relationship with me, and it allowed me to do some discovering and developing. And how I used this very enter into the image of my imagination is I sensorized the three of us being together again. And I actually have a picture of it. One of these sessions or recordings, I'll bring it up. But it had been 2 years since the three of us had been together. And my younger daughter and I flew to Phoenix, Arizona. And we have pictures of all three of us hugging for the first time in 2 years. And I'm telling you, that made me happy even before the event happened, because I had spent many, many days, weeks, months imagining and feeling their hugs, and then it manifested. So that's what it feels like to embody that image. But unless you yourself enter the image and think from it, it is incapable of birth. Now, I want to emphasize that we're thinking from it. You're in the image. You're not thinking of it. You're thinking from it. This will keep practicing that. I guarantee you that you've already done this in your life. It's just rising up maybe some previous experiences that you've had. Use those to remember that you've got this superpower of imagination in you. So We're talking about birthing this. Therefore, it is the height of folly to expect the wish to be realized by the mere passage of time. How many times have you guys heard, oh, just give it time, give it time? And I was like, that's interesting that Neville's putting that in there. It's a height of folly to expect the wish to be realized by the mere passage of time. That which requires imaginative occupancy to produce its effect obviously cannot be affected without such occupancy. So we are taking occupancy of our imaged design. And so you cannot be in one image and not suffer the consequences of not being in the other. Kind of like having your feet on both sides of the fence. That's really, really uncomfortable. Or that you have this divided energy and divided mind. One foot is over here, one foot is over there. That split energy is a little bit of an example of that. Imagination is spiritual sensation. Imagination is spiritual sensation. So I got a little behind on the slides here, so I want to just pause if you're looking at this video, that here's a great image of this extraordinary human embodying the image. He's entering into his imagination, and he's birthing that image. And, you know, he's not waiting for the passage of time. He's taking occupancy in this image. And this can be done, you know, just in moments, sporadically through your day. It's always helpful to do that initial intentional habit in the morning. You know, get those habits moving in yourself, you know, putting habits. There's so much study about them that they're going to create the behavior that we would really love to be experiencing. And when we have the behavior, we have the life that we would really love. So look at him, he's really taking the occupancy of that. So next up, imagination is spiritual sensation. Enter the image of the wish fulfilled, then give it sensory vividness. Male, female, non-gender, whatever you are, you have a dream, you have an image, and it has a spiritual sensation to it. So when you give it this sensory vividness and tones of reality by mentally acting as you would act were it a physical fact. Now, this is what I mean by spiritual sensation, Neville says. Imagine that you're holding a rose in your hand. Smell it. Do you detect the odor of roses? Well, if the rose is not there, why is its fragrance in the air? Through spiritual sensation. That is through the imaginal sight, sound, scent, taste, and touch. You can give to the image sensory vividness. If you do this, all things will conspire to aid your harvesting, and upon reflection, you will see how subtle were the threads that led to your goal. You could never have devised the means which your imaginal activity employed to fulfill itself. I love that. Life really is for us. If you long to escape from a present sense fixation, something that you're not enjoying very much, and you want to transform your present life into a dream of what might well be, you need but imagine that you are already what you want to be, and feel the way you would expect to feel under such circumstances. So even in the comments, what would be some of your spiritual sensations? What would be what would you be seeing? What would you be hearing? What would you be smelling? What would be some of the taste and touch that would be going on in this spiritual sensation? I'd love for you guys to put those in the comments. I invite you to do that so that I can hold that spiritual sensation with you as I read those comments. So, like the make-believe of a child who is remaking the world after its own heart, create your world out of pure dreams of fancy. Mentally enter into your dream. Mentally do what you would actually do. Were it physically true, you will discover that dreams are realized not by the rich, but by the imaginative. How do you like that? Yeah. Dreams are discovered not just by the rich, but by the imaginative. Nothing stands between you and the fulfillment of your dreams, but facts. And facts are the creations of imagining. If you imagine, if you change your imaging, you will change the facts. Man and his past are one continuous structure. This structure contains all of the facts which have been conserved and still operate below the threshold of his surface mind. For him, it is merely history. For him, it seems unalterable, a dead and firmly fixed past. But for yourself, it is living. It is part of the living age. It cannot leave behind him the mistakes of the past, for nothing disappears. Everything that has been is still in existence. The past still exists, and it gives and still gives its results. Man must go back in memory, seek for and destroy the causes of evil, however far back they lie. This going into the past and replaying a scene of the past in imagination as it ought to have been played the first time. Well, Neville likes to call it revision. And you can see here on the slide the art of revision. The revision results in repeal. Revision results in repeal. Changing your life means changing the past. The causes of any present evil are the unrevised scenes of the past. The past and the present form the whole structure of man. They are carrying all of its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present future. One of the most recent examples that I've used the art of revision just recently, I spent 10 days in Kauai over Christmas break in 2021, and I used this very essence of revision results in repeal, just to give myself a clean energy, a vibrant energy, vibrant imaging for 2022. One of my mentors that I've learned very much from, Mary Morrissey, talks about that we can continue to drag around our Harrys. And you're like, what are Harrys, Beth? Well, there's a little story that she tells us that there's these 8 golfers. They go out onto the golf course, and the first 4 go out, they finish, and they're having lunch at the clubhouse, and it is taking forever for the other 4 guys to show up. And finally they see him on the 18th hole, and they are literally dragging one of their buddies along the grass, and his name is Harry. And Harry represents the past. And the other 4 guys at the clubhouse are like, dang, what took you guys so long? Why, Harry dropped dead on the first hole, and we've been dragging him for the last 17. Now, I hope that, it's sad that Harry died, but the point of it is that as I did this art of revision for 2021, and even before, that I didn't want to drag any more Harrys into 2022. I wanted to start fresh with new imaging that would really serve a life that really gives me life. And part of that is doing these YouTubes for me to share how much I've discovered from Neville Goddard and so many other mentors that have opened up my life expansively and, really taken away all the thoughts of shame and guilt, or, I'm not enough. And if I just did one more thing, this person might like me or not, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is exhausting. Do you guys feel exhausted when you live life like that? We're living life by reacting rather than acting. And we are the writers, the producers, the director and actor in our life. And that is where Neville has helped me so much, is to be the director, the writer, the producer, and the actor in my life. So I invite you to this art of revision. One of the ways that I used it is, probably back in junior high, there was just an energy around a conversation I had with my mom, and it entered in my head as I was doing some quiet time in Kauai, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna revise that result and repeal it. And the whole point of it is for us to be free from that. The history doesn't have to have us. It's there, but energetically, it doesn't need to keep being the causation and keep showing up over and over again. So back to the text, Neville says, live nobly, so that mind can store a past well worthy of recall. Should you fail to do so, remember, the first act of correction or cure is always revise. If the past is recreated into the present, so will the revised past be recreated into the present, or else the claim, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow, is a lie, and it is no lie. The purpose of the story-to-story commentary that follows is to link up as briefly as possible the distinct but never disconnected themes of the 14 chapters in this book of the Law of the Promise, and into which Neville has divided the first part of this book. It will serve, he says, I hope, as a thread of coherent thought that binds the whole into the proof of its claim. Here's the claim. Imagining creates reality. Your imagining, my imagining. To make such a claim is easily done. It's easily done. To prove it in the experience of others is far sterner. To stir you to use the law, which now we're even looking at that the quantum physics that we are becoming aware of, to use this law constructively in your own life. That is the aim of this book. Yes, that is the aim of this book. This concludes the first chapter of the Law and the Promise of the Law. Imaging creates reality. We've got 14 more chapters. The next one is chapter 2 about dwell therein. And just to give you a little bit of a quote on the first part by George Herbert, it says, "My God, I heard this day that none doth build a stately habitation, but he that means to dwell therein. What house more stately hath there been, or can be, than is man, to whose creation all things are in decay." So that's where we're going to go next, is chapter 2 on dwell therein. And this is Beth, your host at Life in Full Expression, as we learn from Neville about imaging creates reality. You guys have a great day. Feel a big hug. Much love. Again, I would love to hear your ideal version of yourself, put it in the comments so that I can be imagining with you and holding that, that I am in agreement with that amazing imaging. All right, you guys have a fantastic day of imagining. And until then, live your life in full expression. Take care.